There are these two characters who come from such totally different backgrounds. One is an emotionally complicated woman from New York, and one is emotionally simple, but nevertheless, lives in a brutal environment. And they come together, and they actually are able to trust each other. And that is the essence of the way that we portrayed their relationship.
For 20 years, the cast of King Kong stayed quiet about what really happened. Then, the silence broke. Adrien Brody admitted a regret that left fans stunned. Andy Serkis revealed he was secretly killing himself on screen. Jack Black finally confessed to the plan he had been hiding the whole time. And none of it was the biggest secret Peter Jackson had been carrying for 35 years. The confessions that came 20 years later. For 2 full decades, the cast of King Kong stayed mostly quiet about what really happened on that set. Then, in the final weeks of 2025, the silence began to break. And the first crack in the wall came from a man who had been holding his breath for years. Adrien Brody sat down with a reporter for a long-form conversation and said something that left Peter Jackson fans stunned. Before King Kong had ever entered his life, Jackson had offered Brody a role in The Lord of the Rings. Brody had turned it down. Years passed. He buried the memory. Then one quiet evening, long after the trilogy had exploded into cinema history, he walked into a theater with his girlfriend at the time to watch The Fellowship of the Ring. The lights went down. The story began. And when the screen went black at the end, and the credits started to roll, she turned to him with an expression he still remembers clearly. She asked him how he could have said no to something that beautiful. He froze in his seat. In that moment, sitting in a dark room next to someone he loved, he felt the weight of a decision he had worked very hard to forget. He said, "I remember feeling so stupid." But after 20 years of thinking about it in private, he had finally made peace with the choice. He explained that he did not believe he would have landed the role of Jack Driscoll in Peter Jackson's King Kong if he had said yes to Middle-earth. Andy Serkis had his own confession waiting for the world. He stood in front of a live audience and looked back at the exact moment Peter Jackson had asked him to play Kong. It happened right after they had wrapped the final scene of The Return of the King. Serkis had just spent 3 films crouching and twisting his body to play a 3.5-foot creature named Gollum. He was exhausted, proud, and ready to go back to being a normal actor playing normal people. Then Jackson walked over with a soft smile on his face and asked the question that would change everything. Serkis remembered it with a laugh that still sounded a little surprised. He said he had been so sure his career was about to go back to conventional characters. Instead, Peter Jackson had just asked him to jump from playing a 3.5-foot creature straight into playing a 25-foot gorilla. The joke had become his entire working life. The retrospective pieces kept arriving throughout the 20th anniversary. One of the most striking came from a writer at Inverse who finally gave the film the praise it had been denied in 2005. She wrote that the 3-hour runtime had stopped being a problem. For years, critics had attacked the film for being too long, too bloated, too patient. 20 years later, the length was no longer the weakness. It was the reason the movie worked. Every slow minute, every quiet scene, every lingering glance had been building the emotional bond between Anne and Kong until their friendship felt like something you could reach out and touch. One of the softest reflections came from a man most fans had never even heard of. His name is Greg Broadmoor, and he was a concept artist at Weta Workshop when Kong was being designed. He sat down for an interview with Letterboxd on the 20th anniversary and told the story of how King Kong had saved his career. He had been drawing dinosaurs and robots fighting each other for years before Richard Taylor spotted his portfolio at exactly the right moment. The Kong project was coming up. Taylor needed creature designers. Broadmoor was a dinosaur-obsessed kid who still dreamed about Jurassic Park. Suddenly, he was drawing the monsters that would live inside Skull Island. He said it was the dream of his entire life. Not every look back was sweet, though. The 20th anniversary also brought a cold truth back to the surface. On paper, the movie had earned $556 million around the world. Against a budget of $207 million, that should have been called a success. Advertising had cost roughly $60 million more on top of that. Industry insiders had called the opening weekend strong, but disappointing. Universal had been expecting the biggest film in the world. What they got was a film that underperformed their wildest hopes. That quiet disappointment would shape Peter Jackson's career for the next 20 years. None of that, however, explained the strangest secret any actor in the film had carried. A secret Jack Black finally admitted to in a long press interview years after the cameras had stopped rolling. The secret Jack Black never told anyone. When Peter Jackson was casting the role of Carl Denham, almost nobody in Hollywood thought of Jack Black. Black was the comedy guy. He was the loud guy. He was the man from Tenacious D, the one who had just come off High Fidelity, while School of Rock was about to launch him into another orbit entirely. Asking him to play a dark, selfish, obsessive filmmaker who gets people killed for the sake of his art was not the kind of choice anyone expected. But Black had wanted this role for years, and he had wanted it for reasons he had been hiding from everyone around him. During the film's promotional tour, Black finally told the truth to a reporter. He had been chasing Peter Jackson for a very long time. He had called his agent months before anyone had even heard whispers about the Kong project. He told his agent flat out that he wanted to be in a Peter Jackson movie at any cost at all. He said he did not care about the script. He did not care about the role. He would have shown up and auditioned for a cartoon if Jackson had been the one directing it. He smiled as he said it, and then he admitted the deeper truth underneath the joke. He said he just wanted to party with Peter Jackson. That was the goal he had been carrying around in private. When the offer finally arrived, Black had a plan that he believed was brilliant, a plan he was convinced nobody would ever figure out. He was going to base Carl Denham on Peter Jackson himself. Denham was a filmmaker. The character and the director seemed to match each other too perfectly to ignore. So Black decided he would quietly copy Jackson's mannerisms, the rhythms of his voice, his obsessive intensity about his own work. The plan felt like a genius. Then things got complicated very fast. By the time Black actually arrived in New Zealand for pre-production, Peter Jackson had started losing weight. A lot of weight. Black watched his hero shrink in front of his own eyes over the course of a few short weeks. Suddenly, the physical match he had been counting on was gone. He panicked and thought for a moment that he would have to lose weight too, just to keep the idea alive. He spent the first full week of production following Jackson around the studio, hoping to keep studying him up close. Then he realized something far more important than anything the scale was telling him. The whole plan had been wrong from the very start. Peter Jackson was not the man he had to become for this movie. Jackson was a filmmaker who genuinely cared about his crew. He watched out for his people. He protected them. But Carl Denham was a very different animal entirely. Denham was a user, a liar, a man who would risk the life of every single person around him to get the film he wanted. So Black threw the whole plan out. He started again from scratch. And he reached for a very different source of inspiration. He pulled up old footage of Orson Welles. Not the polished Welles of Citizen Kane, but the wild, reckless, falling-down drunk Welles of his later years. Black dug up tapes of Welles slurring his words at parties, shouting at directors, making terrible decisions in public. There was one more secret about Black's role that fans never figured out until much later. The most famous line in the movie, the one that closes the entire film with a kind of broken music, was not originally written for him at all. It was not the aeroplanes. It was "Beauty killed the Beast." That line had belonged to somebody else in the original plan. It had been written for Fay Wray, the original Ann Darrow from the 1933 film. She was 96 years old when Peter Jackson was making the remake. He had wanted to honor her with a surprise cameo at the very end of the movie, where she would stand over Kong's fallen body in the street and deliver the final words that had defined the original story. Fay Wray said no. Her health was fading. Then, in August of 2004, before filming had even finished, she passed away. The line had nowhere else to go. So Peter Jackson gave it to Jack Black. A moment that had been meant as a quiet tribute to an old screen star became the closing line of a comedian who had been cast against type. While Black was rebuilding his whole approach in the first week of filming, another actor was already deep in a performance so unusual that no one on the crew outside of Peter Jackson fully understood what he was doing. That actor was about to kill himself on camera, and nobody in the audience would notice for 20 long years. The Congolizer and the actor who killed himself. When Peter Jackson offered Andy Serkis the role of King Kong, he quietly offered him something extra on the side. Something most fans never noticed, even after multiple viewings. Jackson asked Serkis to also play Lumpy the cook. Lumpy was a one-eyed Cockney man who worked on the SS Venture as the ship's cook, its barber, and sometimes its surgeon. He was not Kong. He was a human being in the story. He had his own scenes, his own lines, his own personality, and his own death on the island. When you watch the film carefully, something starts to click. In the scene where Kong shakes the log over the ravine and throws the screaming sailors to their deaths, one of the men he is killing is Lumpy, which means Andy Serkis, playing Kong, was killing Andy Serkis, playing Lumpy. The actor was killing himself on screen in the middle of a major action sequence, and almost no one in the audience ever realized it. The dual role came to Serkis in a very personal way. Right after the final scene of The Return of the King had wrapped, Peter Jackson pulled him aside and gave him a gift. Jackson handed him one of the real prop rings that had been used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was the kind of gift you give somebody when you are saying goodbye to a long chapter together. In the middle of that emotional moment, Jackson asked the question that would change Serkis's life all over again. He asked him if he wanted to play King Kong. Serkis said yes without a second thought. Playing Kong meant much more than just standing on a motion capture stage. Peter Jackson wanted Serkis to be physically present on set with Naomi Watts for every single scene between Anne and Kong. He wanted Naomi to be able to look into a real pair of human eyes while she was performing. So Serkis put on a gray gorilla muscle suit, covered his face and body in 132 small round markers, and spent weeks climbing up cherry pickers, ladders, and building frames just to position himself inside her eyeline. Peter Jackson later spoke about it with obvious admiration in his voice. He said every single close-up of Naomi in the entire film, without exception, was Naomi actually looking at Andy. She was never staring into empty space. Andy was always there somewhere above her or beside her, suspended from a platform or perched on a box or balanced on a ladder, making sure she had a real pair of eyes to react to. Naomi Watts gave him a nickname on set that the crew started using daily. She called him a ballet dancer on steroids. To make Kong's voice real on set, the sound department built Serkis a custom rig that the crew started calling the Congolizer. It was a device that took his voice as he spoke into a microphone, dropped it 3 full octaves in real time, and then broadcast it back through massive speakers mounted around the set. Naomi could hear it echoing off the walls. She could feel it in the floor. On top of that, Serkis wore prosthetic gorilla teeth. Real physical dentures shaped like a silverback's jaw that reshaped the way his mouth formed vowels and consonants. Serkis described the whole setup with a grin. He said the Congolizer turned his ordinary speaking voice into something that sounded like it was coming from the throat of a real animal. That was how Naomi Watts was able to react to grunts and roars and deep rumbles that felt physically alive in the room. The trip to Rwanda is another story most fans never heard. Before filming began, Serkis spent 2 full months at Regent's Park Zoo in London, studying 4 gorillas up close every day. One of them was a dominant silverback named Bob. Bob had been raised in a circus alongside chimpanzees, which had made him unpredictable in ways no one could fully explain. He once picked up a piece of rubble and threw it straight at Serkis's camera lens, smashing the glass. But the bond Serkis truly formed was with one of the females. Her name was Zaire. She chose him in a way he had not expected. She sat with him. She watched him work. She waited for him to arrive every morning. When Serkis brought his wife Lorraine to the zoo to meet Zaire face to face, something very strange happened. Zaire filled her mouth with mineral water and sprayed it all over Lorraine. Serkis believed Zaire was jealous of his human partner. A wild animal inside a zoo enclosure had picked a silent fight with a human wife over a gorilla actor she had somehow decided belonged to her. Then Serkis traveled to the Virunga volcanoes in Rwanda with the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund. 10,000 feet above sea level, he tracked a family of 23 wild mountain gorillas through the fog. One afternoon, one of the silverbacks charged him directly. Serkis later talked about how fast the moment had unfolded in front of him. He said the charge happened with almost no warning. Silverbacks are unbelievably fast when they want to be, and the first sign you get is often the last. They beat their chests with open hands instead of clenched fists, because they have inflated chest sacs that resonate like drums. They hit themselves 17 times every second, producing a sound that rolls through the jungle like thunder. That was the detail Serkis carried back with him and fought to get into the final film. Kong's chest beats are not balled fists the way they were in 1933. They are open palms slapping against inflated chest sacs at 17 beats a second. Apart from all this, the other side of the camera was where the real damage was being done. Naomi Watts was covered in bruises. Jamie Bell was stepping onto an aeroplane for the first time in his life. And Colin Hanks was receiving letters from home that would follow him for the rest of his career. The bruises, the tears, and the scenes you never saw. While Andy Serkis was inventing a gorilla from the inside out on one side of the set, Naomi Watts was quietly being destroyed on the other side of it. Most fans never understood what her physical performance cost her. When Kong ran through the jungle carrying her in his fist, when the Vastatosaurus Rex shook her between its jaws, when she was flung around during the biplane attack over Manhattan, those motions were all real. Naomi was strapped into the rigs. She was thrown across sound stages. She was shaken by machines for hours at a time, take after take. She talked about it during the press tour with unusual honesty. She had done 2 straight days of hard physical impact work, and her body was covered in deep purple bruises by the time she went home. After one very bad fall, she froze on the ground. She could not move right away, and for a moment, one long, terrifying moment she could still remember years later, she thought she might be paralyzed. The feeling in her arms and legs came back, but the memory stayed with her. She said that when you are doing that much physical work, you stop feeling like an actor and start feeling like an athlete. And athletes have accidents all the time. She called King Kong the hardest thing she had ever done in front of a camera. What kept her going was Peter Jackson himself. She had been nervous about being turned into a damsel in distress because she had built her reputation playing complicated women in films like Mulholland Drive. She said she could not have signed on if it had not been Peter Jackson directing. Jackson promised her Ann Darrow would be a real woman with her own strength and her own story. She held him to that promise every single day. Jamie Bell had a very different experience on the same production. He had been cast as Jimmy, the teenage cabin boy on the venture, at only 18 years old. He had come off Billy Elliot, the British film that made him famous overnight. But there was something about this role that changed his life. Before King Kong, he had never once in his life been on an aeroplane. A quiet boy from County Durham in the north of England had never flown anywhere until Peter Jackson's production flew him halfway across the world. He grew up on that film. Colin Hanks had a story that hit fans right in the heart. He played Preston, Denham's long-suffering assistant. When he first called home, his sister screamed into the phone for 5 full minutes. She was a Lord of the Rings superfan who could not believe her own brother was about to work with Peter Jackson. The reaction that broke Colin open came from his father. Tom Hanks left a voicemail singing the words "King Kong" over and over like a song. A letter followed a few weeks later. Tom had written that as a father, he was very, very happy for his son. As an actor, he was unbelievably jealous. The 2-time Oscar winner had just told his own son, in writing, that he envied him. Thomas Kretschmann, who played the steady-handed Captain Engelhorn, brought an entirely different life story to the production. Most fans never realized he was German, and most fans definitely never knew what he had done long before he ever became an actor. When he was 19 years old, Kretschmann had walked out of East Germany on foot. He had trekked for a full month straight through 4 different countries to escape communism. He was carrying $100 and his passport, nothing else. The journey was so brutally cold that he lost part of one of his fingers to frostbite along the way. A man who had risked his own life to cross borders on foot in the middle of winter was now standing on a soundstage, steering a fake ship through the storms of Skull Island. Every one of these cast members had carried a piece of the film's enormous weight. But the heaviest weight of all was being carried by the man behind the camera. And by the time the cameras finally stopped rolling, it had almost finished him off completely, the director who nearly broke making his dream. Peter Jackson was 9 years old when he first saw King Kong. He watched the 1933 original on a Friday night television broadcast in Wellington, New Zealand. He cried at the ending. That weekend, he grabbed a lump of plasticine and his parents' Super 8 movie camera and tried to animate a little brontosaurus of his own. He talked about that Friday night with raw honesty decades later. He said the moment of shedding tears for a giant ape had never left him. 3 years after that, he tried to build his own Kong model using his mother's fur coat, some wire, and pieces of rubber. The project fell apart before he could finish it. The obsession did not. When Universal first offered him the Kong remake in the spring of 1996, Peter Jackson said yes immediately. He was given final cut, gross participation, and full artistic control over a film shot entirely in New Zealand. A package that generous was almost unheard of for any director at the time, let alone for a filmmaker whose biggest film so far had been a small horror comedy. Then, in early 1997, the studio canceled everything without warning. They cited the weak box office performance of his recent film The Frighteners and the upcoming releases of Godzilla and Mighty Joe Young as their reasons. Jackson was devastated in a way he had never been devastated before. His wife and co-writer Fran Walsh had to be the one to tell the Weta team the bad news. Jackson physically could not bring himself to deliver the news to his own crew. He later called the moment probably the most disastrous thing in his life. So he went away and made the Lord of the Rings trilogy instead. He won 11 Oscars for The Return of the King on the night of February 29th of 2004. The very next morning, while most directors would have still been nursing champagne headaches and celebrating with their families, Jackson boarded a plane from Los Angeles to New York City. He went straight to the top of the Empire State Building. He met 96-year-old Fay Wray in person. He took reference photographs. He had been waiting his entire life for that single morning. Then the real cost of making King Kong began to show itself. The budget kept ballooning past $175 million. The studio refused to fund the difference between the contracted runtime and the longer version Jackson wanted to deliver. So Jackson quietly cut a personal check for $32 million out of his own director fee to let the film run past 200 minutes. New Line Cinema had been offered the chance to co-finance the overage amount. They said no. Jackson paid the difference himself, rather than let a single frame of his movie be cut against his will. The physical toll was far worse than the financial one. Over the course of roughly 10 months of filming and post-production, Peter Jackson lost 70 pounds. His longtime co-writer Philippa Boyens lost a similar amount during the same stretch of production. Their friends and crew members watched them both shrink in front of the cameras of the production diaries, which were being released online every single week for the film's fans to watch at home. Jackson described his diet plainly and without drama. He said he had gotten tired of being overweight and unfit, so he had swapped hamburgers for yogurt and muesli, and it seemed to be working. On the day of the film's world premiere in December of 2005, he looked like a man who had just survived a small war. He told one reporter the unfiltered truth in a hotel room interview. He said he was absolutely exhausted. He said the team had finished the movie roughly 10 minutes before they had to get on the airplane to New York for the premiere. He said he had been at the visual effects house at 9 in the morning, approving the final shots, while their flight was leaving at 9:30. He said he had not enjoyed being healthy yet. He said he was completely shattered. Shattered was the exact right word for what happened next. The Oscars that March crushed him in a whole new way. King Kong won 3 golden statues for visual effects, sound editing, and sound mixing. But the film was not nominated for Best Picture at all. Jackson, who had just swept 11 awards the year before for The Return of the King, was left out of the biggest category entirely. The industry had quietly decided that Kong was a technical triumph and an emotional failure, no matter how hard its director had worked. The visual effects team, led by Joe Lettery at Weta Digital, went on to use the same facial capture technology they had built for Kong to power James Cameron's Avatar 4 years later. Kong's 4 million individually simulated strands of hair and 132 facial motion capture markers became the foundation for an entire new era of cinema. For Peter Jackson himself, The film would always remain the moment when his childhood dream had almost swallowed him alive. 20 years on, the film feels different. It feels braver. It feels more honest in its intentions than it ever did on opening weekend. The cast has finally started saying the things they never said back in 2005. Peter Jackson has not made another film quite like it since. And somewhere inside a small movie theater in Wellington, New Zealand, on a Friday night in 1970, a 9-year-old boy sat quietly in the dark and cried at the death of a giant ape. 55 years later, the ripples of that single moment are still shaping the way we tell stories on the biggest screens in the entire world. Which cast confession caught you most off guard? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know which movie secret you want us to dig into next.